So the only reason I'm talking about this is because you guys are, but I want to really quickly describe a setting, and then I want to talk about why that setting is really popular with a lot of far-right people, and then I want to talk about why I think the people who like it for those reasons are really missing the point of that setting, okay? So Warhammer 40K, get your soys out of the way now, because if you soy every time I say it, you're going to be soying the entire time I talk about it, you know? Um, Warhammer 40K is basically like a broad like media environment. It's like this it's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe where they've got the comics and the movies and the games. It's like that. It's basically set in the future, about 40,000 years in the future, so coincidentally, where the entirety of the galaxy is being fought over by humans and a bunch of alien races. And it's cool, and there are tabletop games and video games, and a lot of the stuff surrounding it is really awesome. I've played tabletop Warhammer. I have painted miniatures back there, and unpainted miniatures. Video games. I really like Battlefleet Gothic Armada, and I've played a lot of Total War Warhammer 2, though that is Warhammer Fantasy, not 40K. There's a lot of good stuff there. And if any of you are interested in examining it, I strongly encourage you to do so, because there's stuff in there that I think appeals to pretty much anyone. In particular, the subreddit Sig Marxism is a left-leaning Warhammer 40,000 subreddit, which I think is pleasant and nice because it gets around some of the elements of the community that that I will talk about in a second. So here's the basic story, and I'm skipping over like everything, so forgive me. But the basic story is this, okay? Humanity existed as it did in our world, and then we fought a bunch and invented faster than light travel and expanded across the galaxy, and it was super cool, okay? The age of technology. We invented stuff, we spread out, we had a great time, okay? But then, oopsie doopsie, it turns out that psychics and magic are real, and magic comes from hell, and hell is everywhere, just barely beyond a thin veil of power that you can transpose if you're psychically talented. And well, people started getting psychic powers and doing cool shit like blowing up entire cities and turning everyone's skin inside out, and they didn't know how to control their powers, and humanity got really, really bad really quickly, and we were spread all over the galaxy, and we had no way of dealing with these issues. And what happened then was the Age of Strife. 5,000 years or so of humanity tearing itself apart, of warp storms encompassing the galaxy so communities couldn't contact each other, planets couldn't hail their home planets, and starships couldn't go into certain systems, and just everything fell to shit, you know? And then, around 30,000 years since the birth of Christ, a guy called the Emperor was born, or maybe just made himself evident to humanity, and he was super powerful and super cool and super knowledgeable, and he was like, hey, I'm going to unite humanity in a great crusade. So he did that. First, he conquered Earth, called Terra in the future, and then he sent out a bunch of super soldiers across the galaxy to reunite all of humanity and try to turn it into one great Imperium of Man. And the Emperor was a couple of things. Well, he was fiercely secular. The Emperor of mankind proposed that his agents spread the imperial truth. And the imperial truth was that there is no God. There are no superstitions, no demons, no angels, no God. There is the material universe and nothing else. One thing the Emperor felt was that with a universe as big as it is, humans had an unfortunate tendency to reduce themselves to superstition when given the chance. And he felt that that hurt humanity. So he suggested that no, we should militarily enforce secular values. Uh, the Great Crusade went out and essentially found and reunited humanity. And when they found religions, they would crush it. They would kill entire, clergy classes, burn the priest cities to the ground, destroy and bomb cathedrals. They would do everything that they could. And the Great Crusade went out and further. And some people talk about the politics of this age, the Great Crusade, which was when humanity, for the first time in thousands of years, seemed like it had a future, you know? And there were elements of the Imperium of Man that were very far right at that time, and there were elements that were pretty left-leaning, and then there were elements that don't really work within our modern understanding of politics. See, the left and the right politically are really relative terms. And our understanding of politics here on Earth, in reality today, are informed by the material conditions that we live in. We have one planet that we control. But 10,000 years in the future, the systems of politics that we understand today might be made utterly irrelevant by changes in technology and changes to our communication and our culture. I'll say this much. In 30,000 years from now, nobody will use the word socialism, okay? Nobody will use the word socialism or capitalism. The world set before us that far in time will be so alien to us that our modern systems of understanding political action will not apply. There will be other battles to fight. There will be other things to care about. There will be other issues to concern yourself with. You know? Um, that's not to say the fundamental underlying issues, equality versus hierarchy, might not still be important. In my opinion, they still will be, but it'll take a different shape. So with the Imperium of Man, circa the Great Crusade, was it left or right-leaning? Well, some stuff was pretty right-leaning. First of all, due process was more of a suggestion than anything. The military leaders that were sent out, the Primarchs, had a ton of control over the behavior of their armies and the worlds they subjugated. Some of them would treat the worlds they subjugated really, really well, you know? And some of them really wouldn't. There were Primarchs that would attempt to use diplomacy to negotiate with long-lost human colonies. And then there were Primarchs that would send down engines of blood and fire to raise the planets into nothing until the survivors had no choice but to comply. So, with that respect, the action of delegating overwhelming political jurisprudence to military officials, that's pretty right-leaning. It's also not something that happens today. You know why? Because right now, in the modern world, anyone on Earth can call anyone else on Earth and have it be picked up within a fraction of a second. Nowadays, you don't have to delegate a bunch of authority to generals because the political leaders are always a phone call away. But when the armies are separated by tens of thousands of light years, well, to what extent is it legitimate to give deference to military leaders? I don't have a hard answer. It's a fictional story. I don't have any hardline answer, but it's an interesting question. There's some other stuff there that's definitely very far right, very authoritarian. For example, the Emperor of Mankind was the undisputed master of Emperor of Mankind. There was not a democracy. Democracy was not a thing. The Emperor controlled everything. Planets were controlled by planetary governors who were appointed by the Council of Terra, which was basically just a group of human civilians who interpreted the will of the Emperor and gave it out. There was no democracy anywhere here. Nothing was democratic. It was all authoritarian, directly authoritarian, with varying degrees of, you know, administrative due process and checks and balances. So, for example, early on in the Great Crusade, there were times when bad behavior on the part of military leaders was checked and criticized. And that's cool. But there were other times, most often times, when that didn't happen. And that's not cool. There were times when the emperor sent out journalists to accompany these militaries and encourage them to be truthful and honest in their interpretation of events, which is good. Free speech and free journalism and free press are worthwhile left-leaning values. But they also faced heavy censorship to make sure that morale maintained in these great massive galactic wars. The thing is, the Imperium of Man was never at its best left-leaning. At best, it was a benevolent monarchy. It was a benevolent totalitarian dictatorship. Because the Emperor was supposed to be benevolent. The most consistent narratives about the Emperor of Man was that he was supposed to legitimately be above men. Gracious and humanitarian and loving, just in control of trillions of people. So, you know, the math gets a bit tough at that scale. But with time, things got a lot worse. The long story short of it is that there was a betrayal. Some of the Primarchs rebelled. They killed the Emperor, set the galaxy aflame, and left what was remaining of the Imperium of Man essentially to wallow in thousands and thousands of years of wicked superstition, bureaucracy, and misery. Essentially, when the leadership of the emperor was taken away, when he was killed, the narrative of the story kind of reaffirms the idea that humanity can't really live without a leader to aspire to, if that makes any sense. Or to put it another way, humanity needed the emperor to keep it on track. And in the absence of the emperor, humanity fell back into superstition. It fell back into the imperial cult. Whereas the imperial truth was all about promoting secularism, the imperial cult venerated the emperor, then known as the God Emperor, as the master of mankind and the spiritual divine leader of all of humanity. In the modern Warhammer 40k setting, they are so devoted to this imperial cult that you, your family, and the city that your family lives in can be purged from orbit if it's found out that there are people within your city who are explicitly not of the belief that the Emperor is a god. Entire planets and cities have been committed to fire just because they disagreed with the religious, uh, the preacher, the religious deification of the time. The modern Imperium of Man is incredibly far right in almost every imaginable way. The term is ecclesiarchy. Well, that disagreed with the ecclesiarchy. In almost every imaginable way, the modern 40k is incredibly far right. Overwhelmingly so. Hold on, wait, one person's spamming. Jeez, they were really spamming. My God. Thought like a bunch of people were spamming spirit science, but it turns out it was just one person. Anyway. There's a reason why I'm getting to all this. Basically, the modern universe of 40k is really complicated to talk about politically because there isn't only the Imperium of Man, there's the million planets they control. The universe in 40k operates as a kind of space feudalism where planets are allowed to operate semi-autonomously as long as they pay their taxes to the Imperium of Man and they commit military forces to them. And that's about it, you know? So some planets are well run and have democracies within their own governments. And then there are other planets that are brutal beyond the wildest imagining of human beings. There are planets where you could be born and die and live a life that's not that different from our own in terms of quality of life. And there are worlds where fetuses are harvested from birth mothers so they can be trained in the use of firearms at the age of 5 and then sent off to die in war at 15 while wearing the gear that's been passed down through 17 generations of guard before them. It really depends where you're born. Yeah, Krieg. It really, really, really depends. Some planets are livable, but most of them have been choked black and yellow with the smog of the imperial pollution. There are planets where acid rain is a global and constant occurrence, meaning that roofs have to constantly be reinforced as every square inch of the city exposed is constantly eaten away at by an ongoing in just rain pounding away at everything, people whose flesh burns away when they walk outside. There are death worlds where humans shouldn't live there, but still do for some reason. There's a lot of variety. When you have a million worlds under the control of the Imperium of Man, there's always going to be variety. Now, the reason why I'm getting through all of this is because in addition to it being like exceedingly far right, it's also miserable for almost all of the things that make it far right, with one caveat, with one exception. The point of Warhammer 40k is that it's miserable. It's literally like the Grimdark. They codified Grimdark practically. Everyone who, if you write a book about 40k or read a book about 40k, anything, just anything about the media makes it exceedingly clear that it was a horrible place to live in. The opening scrawl of 40k makes that clear, that there's nothing, the universe holds nothing of hope, that it's just like, Christ, listen to this. This was the beginning of every book that was written in its time. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. This is the tale of these times. It is a universe you can live today if you dare, for this is a dark and terrible era where you will find little comfort or hope. If you want to take part in the adventure, then prepare yourself now. I think this is from the 80s. They don't say that in the most recent ones. Forget the power of technology, science, and common humanity. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for there is no peace amongst the stars. Only an eternity of carnage and slaughter and the laughter of thirsting gods. That's it. There is only war. So why am I going into all this? Well, the point that I'm laboriously trying to get to is that the universe of 40K fucking sucks. So why are there a ton of far-right people who like to deify elements of the Imperium of Man and use it in the political propaganda that they create? Why were there so many God Emperor of the United States memes? Why, when you go into a lot of 40K, communities, do you see people who talk about the Imperium of Man and use the language of the Imperium of Man as though it was like a cool and good place to live in? You guys have noticed that, right? I mean, for God's sake, look at this. I saw this all the time back in 2016. They photoshopped Donald Trump's head onto the God Emperor of Mankind. And I mean, it's nice, funny memes or whatever. It's like nice LARPing, but like in the story, this guy failed, right? This guy died. The guy they photoshopped Donald Trump's head onto here failed to control his empire, died in a rebellion, and has to sit in a corpse throne while over thousands of years the Imperium of Man that he built rots. So why is he being deified? You're trying to say channers know what actually happens in stories? I do think so, because many times, you see this type of behavior in communities that are fans of 40K, and the first thing you learn about 40K is like the Horus Heresy, which is what tells you what happened here with the Emperor. They know the history. They know that they're deifying Trump by associating him with an icon where in media, that icon was a failure who rots now on a throne while everything he built dies. My suggestion is that they don't actually care, that the aesthetics of authoritarianism and militarism are so important to the far right that they don't actually care that they're borrowing symbology from media that explicitly disagrees with their conclusions. Games Workshop, as shitty of a company as it is, put out a statement affirming their support of Black Lives Matter and saying people who disagree with Black Lives Matter essentially can just fucking leave the hobby for all they care. That caused a lot of people to get angry. They also actually demanded that the formerly known as Arch Warhammer YouTuber, now known as Arch, disassociate with their brand because the dude was a neo-Nazi. Or at least like a fash. I forget the details. So Games Workshop isn't super far right. And what's more, the super far right empire in the media they produced sucks. And a lot of why it sucks is because it's far right. The worst parts of living in the Imperium are the religious fanaticism, are the authoritarianism, are the hypermilitarism. But these are all of the things that the people on the far right tend to deify. That's weird. My argument is that for them, the aesthetics take prominence over anything else. That even though the actual content of the media they like, and many of them, I imagine, they do like 40K, even though the actual content of the media they enjoy explicitly criticizes and mocks their politics, they adopt it anyway because they think it's cool. It's the same reason why we just saw Adam Calhoun, who has a United States flag Punisher emblem on his back wall, in spite of the fact that the Punisher is an amoral cop killer, anti-hero, who I guarantee you does not give a single shit about patriotism, okay? It's the same reason why a lot of far-right people like Fallout, even though Fallout, very explicitly in the first two games, and perhaps less so, but still in the Bethesda sequels, is very anti-war and anti-patriotism. If you play the Fallout games, they're like beating you over the head with the imagery here. Hey, dumb, unintrospective patriotism means the end of humanity. Dogmatism and fanaticism destroy people. But people, they LARP over that, They're like, oh yeah, dude, Fallout, nah, better red than dead. Like, why do people so often on the right do this? Well, part of it is because they have really, really, really bad media comprehension. Seriously, conservatives, in my experience, are not great at understanding the messages that media are trying to like deliver to you. Even when it's really obvious, like really, really obvious. But even if they do understand the messaging, I think they just like look past it, you know? Like, can I show you something? Like, this is a painting. Now, I think this painting is cool, okay? Without getting too deep into the specifics, it's a painting of a bunch of like armored super soldiers standing in a big cathedral ship. Okay, it's cool, right? It's shiny. It is shiny. But what does it represent? Well, to me, what it represents is a kind of larger than life, hyperbolized, propagandistic retelling of a military force. You know what I mean? When I see this, I see propaganda in every paint stroke, and I like that because it's self-aware. But I think a lot of people see this and they see past the propagandizing, they just see glory. But that's all they see. They don't see anything else. To be clear, in the context of the story, the people here in armor, Space Marines, are barely human. They are war-torn, amoral, honor-obsessed, callous, condescending, killing machines who have at best neutral relationships with the rest of mortal humanity. Okay? That's at best. They're essentially, yeah, they're sociopathic killing machines. They're narcissists. They're people too, Vaush. Not all Space Marines don't be like that. Guys, I like the Salamanders too, but you know goddamn well the majority of Space Marines are sociopathic killing machines who would turn on humanity the nanosecond they felt that this already happened, guys. This already fucking happened, guys. Come on. This are I haven't forgotten the Horus Heresy. Also, even the best Space Marine chapters kidnap human children and torture them for like a decade until they're ready to have skin implants and turn into Space Marines. Shh. Okay, don't paint over this. I know they look nice in their armor, okay? But men are men, and these are not the best of them. They're just the tallest of them. That's the point. The point of all this media is that you can give people as much power as you want. It doesn't make them better. The whole point of the 40K story is that the more authority you give people, this does not necessarily correspond to a positive increase in the extent to which they can contribute positively to the world around them. The Space Marines are superhuman, sure, but they're shown to be boastful and prideful and often quite sociopathic. And the Primarchs are all daddy issue bitch babies. The Emperor himself, the best of humanity, was unable to understand the problems with how he treated the people beneath him. Warhammer 40K is an anti-authoritarian piece of media. A lot of people aren't willing to accept that because they're high on copium and they want to believe that all the glorious propagandizing paintings that they see are meant to be a representation of the tone of the setting morally as opposed to the tone of the setting aesthetically. But those are two very, 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 very different things. And I hope you all understand that, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with enjoying that media, by the way. If you like reading 40K and like embracing just the stupid, stupid glory of like, ah, yes, we piloted the cathedral ship of the Litany's Litany. 10 trillion men on board, the ship larger than a moon. We steer the ship into the sun and fire the cannon through the... Like, if you want to read shit like that, have it, fine, jerk off to it. I don't care. Have a ball. That shit's fun as hell to read. But recognize, ultimately, that the media is a satire of politics and a satire of authoritarianism. The only caveat, and I mentioned this earlier, the only caveat there is to this fundamentally is that there's a premise that in the real world is untrue, but in 40K is true. But there's a difference between people who can recognize that premise is non-reality in 40K and people who think that because it exists in 40K, it must exist in the real world. And that is the idea that great terror is justified by external threat. In the real world today, people on the right will justify authoritarianism by saying that our civilization is under threat from within and from without. These people are objectively wrong. Far-right governments are more unstable than liberal democracies by any measurable extent, and the idea that the existence of trans people within and Mexican immigrants without are tearing apart our country is ludicrous fear-mongering. So in the real world, when people talk about how we have no choice but to do X, or our Western civilization will fall apart in any moment if we kowtow to these demands, they're wrong. However, in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, there is an argument to be made that ruthless, unrelenting authoritarianism and military supremacy is justified because the threats to humanity are real. And in the context of 40K, this is true. This is completely true. Not all the bad stuff the Imperium of Man does is justified, but authoritarianism and military supremacy are necessary parts of self-defense in that universe. Because I've only talked about the Imperium of Man, I haven't talked about the Tyrannid, or the Necron, or the Orcs, or fucking Chaos. I haven't talked about any of the big threats that are barreling down on humanity from every side. And if you guys read and keep up with the lore in 40K, you find that humanity is losing all the time, constantly being pushed back further and further. The last big thing that happened in the lore was that one of the most heavily fortified planets in all of the Imperium, called Cadia, got blown up by crashing a spaceship the size of a moon into it, and then a warp storm the size of the galaxy cut the galaxy in half, leaving two Imperiums, the regular Imperium and the Dark Imperium. Half of humanity is now cut off from contact from Terra. They're fucked. Now, in 40K, in that universe, relentless authoritarianism and military supremacy and sending children to work in factories when they're 10 years old might actually be the only way those humans as a species can survive. And guys, for those of you who have read 40K, you agree, right? Not making this up. Humanity is constantly losing. Even with everything the Imperium does, they lose. Every year, more planets fall. Yeah, it's very fucked. And that's why it's grimdark. Because it's a fantasy universe where even the worst excesses of human military encroachment can't save us. That's what makes it grimdark. That there is no hope. That even the worst case scenario, where we bleed away all of our humanity into putting everything towards our military, where we give away all of our rights, everything we have, that's still not enough. That's what makes it grimdark. And right-leaning people like it because they don't realize that that's satire. They look at that element of 40K and think, wow, you're right. Mexicans are just like the Necrons. Trans people are like Slaanesh. And, I don't know, Muslims are corn. And they read that and they soy and they cream their little fucking board shorts, cargo shorts with the pockets. That's what they think. Corn, Khorne. It's a god. He's bad. Here's what corn looks like. Okay. Here's what they think Islam is. Okay. Here's corn. All right. There we go. Now the thing is, in real life, nothing that looks like this actually exists. Yes, he's basically just Satan. In real life, the painting we're looking at right now doesn't exist. Nothing looks like this in real life. In 40K, something does look like that. It's called Khorne. Blood for the blood god. Wait, there are actual gods? They are. They're in the warp. There are gods in the 40K universe, but they're gods in like the Norse sense, where they're gods in the sense that like they're just incredibly powerful entities. They don't have like a moral claim to the universe. It's just they're really, really strong, you know? Not gods like the Christian God, where it's like they made the universe. More like they were born of power and they're very evil. Yeah, they're like primal elemental forces, basically. And this guy is the primal force of violence. Yeah, gods in power, not in title. Exactly. There are 4 of them. Maybe. Maybe there are 4 of them. Anyway, in real life, nothing like that exists. In real life, humanity is not being besieged by ancient souls entrapped within living metal armor that were laid to rest on planets millions of years ago who rise now to reclaim the galaxy. In real life, humanity is not under attack from gene seed stealing tyrannid bug hive fleets that blacken the sky with their aerial forces. We're not under attack from mushroom orcs. We're not under attack from the the concept of mortal decay. We're not under attack from any of this crap, okay? There aren't Dark Eldar raiding our settlements. As I understand, the many political problems that Haiti experiences do not among them include Slaneshi cults. In real life, this stuff doesn't happen. The universe is dark, as far as we know. It's only occupied by us. And in a 40K, where there is only humanity, there's only mankind, all of that need for authoritarianism and militarism wash away. Those of you who are familiar with the setting would know that, right? I mean, you might still have problems with like rebels and stuff, but if there was no chaos and no Xenos, only humans traveling the stars, then not 1,000th of what the Imperium does can be justified. Not even close, because there is no great existential enemy. And here on Earth today, there is also no great existential enemy. There's just us and gorillas who will one day fight us for supremacy over this planet. A fight that we will hopefully win, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. So hopefully I've explained my thoughts on the politics of all this. The key element of satire in 40K, the thing that justifies the we're all bad guys together theme, the setting, is the idea of an existential external threat, which is something that does not exist in reality, unless you're talking about like solar flares or some shit, you know what I mean, like something like that. But and in terms of human action, we are ourselves, and that's it. And that's why I like 40K. I like 40K because I like the Imperium of Man in the few moments where the horrible things that it does are justified. I like 40K because there's something grimly, horrifically interesting about reading a book and thinking, wow, they really didn't have a choice but to nuke that city from orbit, did they? That's just an interesting setting. You know what I mean? It's like anathema. It's like a cure to all those young adult novels where like the group of teenagers have to save the universe, but they're too pansy to kill anyone along the way. So you have that point that happens like in the middle of the second book where it's like, yeah, we're saving the world, but we can't kill him. And then they deliberate over that for 30 pages. That does not happen in 40K. That is not a conversation that takes place in 40K. It's just a different vibe, and I like that vibe. And I love Avatar The Last Airbender, even for its advocacy for pacifism. I would never want anyone who takes 40K seriously to make real-world political prescriptions, you know? You get what I mean, right? I think you get what I mean. That's why a lot of far-right people like this stuff, because they see the grand external threat, and they think it's reflective of what's happening today. And also the aesthetics appeal to them, stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, you can invest in the fantasy without endorsing it. And you don't have to be like a responsible 40K player. Have fun with it. Just don't be stupid enough to believe that just because in the magical fantasy universe there are like evil aliens that somehow applies to real world political decision making. I can't believe there are people who actually have a shallow enough understanding of the world to actually to actually get that from 40K. You know? Games Workshop laughs at you people. Honestly, how can you. The reason you like 40K is because you feel like feeling justified in justifiable authoritarian measures. I'm not the one calling exterminatus on planets. I just think it's interesting that there's a universe where things are so fucked that these are the decisions that people have to make. What do you mean me justified? I'm not doing it. Of course, the best 40K stories aren't actually about the big battles and the big fleets and everything. The best stories in 40K are about humans desperately trying to carve out a life for themselves in that hellish world. It gets boring reading over and over again. Oh, wow, the big fleet parked outside the city. The guy called in from the ground. Dude, there's like aliens here, and they're like super badass, bro. Like bigger than what Star Wars can get away with for sure. And also, there's like chaos, and when you look at the demons, they ripple a bit in reality. And like, pfft, you know how big our ships are? Bigger than any other currently existing sci fi property. The best stories are the ones where humans, broken, flawed, and traumatized, desperately try to carve out a life for themselves in a world that is utterly inhospitable to human life. Those are the best 40K stories. You know? Do you think there's a way to have those types of media without attracting Nazis like moths to a lamp? Well, for one, we need more left-leaning people getting in on the media. You guys should join it. What book should we start on? If you guys want to start on any like books yourselves, the Horus Heresy series is like dozens of books long. It's just kind of an ongoing project, but the first 5 or so books are a good read. The Night Lords trilogy, while it presumes some stuff, is a really, really good series of books. And I like the Eisenhorn trilogy, and it leads into the Ravenhorn trilogy, and then the Beckwin trilogy, which hasn't finished yet. It's just 2 books of the 3. Um, those are fun. I like those a lot. Eisenhorn really is phenomenal. The thing that I like about the Eisenhorn books is that they're you read from the perspective of an inquisitor. And an inquisitor is like a detective, basically, but like amped up 20 times. And there's this searing contrast between the faltering humanity of the protagonist and the inhumanity of the world that he finds himself in. Something that I find more gripping than a Space Marine protagonist, in my personal opinion. So get into stuff like that. You can look into tabletop games if you're incredibly wealthy. If you're exceedingly wealthy, maybe if you have a lot of money, so much money, maybe you could consider buying a single Warhammer miniature. Just get a mortgage first. There's also the whole 3D printing thing, which if I talk about it at any length, Games Workshop will delete my channel. But you can. There's plenty of stuff to look in there, um, that are at the very least worth being aware of. So that's nice. Um, it's just fun to get into. You know, there are nice video games. The Total War Warhammer series is in fantasy, but that's good. Mechanicus? Mechanicus slaps. It's like an XCOM style game, you know? There was the Xbox 360 Space Marine. There's the Dawn of War series, which are RTS games, which everyone loves. There's Battlefleet Gothic Armada, which is like a space tactics, like fleet management game, which I like. Mechanicus is really, really good, yeah. Warhammer Vermintide is Warhammer Fantasy, but they're part of the same broad IP, so you can look into that. Um, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff to play. A lot of really fun stuff to play. Sig Marxism, again, is a left-leaning Warhammer 40,000 subreddit that's worth looking into. And if you're interested in knowing how you can reform these spaces to make them a little bit more hospitable for people, a little bit less far right leaning, the best thing you can do actually is get into the medium so thoroughly that you become part of the community, which allows you to have a say and sway over where the community goes in the future. There are now books that are being written that have non-binary characters. Weren't there some non-binary? What were they? Were they from the Assassinatorum? Who were the non-binary characters? They go by they them, right? Who was it? I think. Oh, it was in one of the books. I haven't read the book. I just heard a segment of it. Why does that matter? Well, non-binary representation in some of these books can be indicative of the direction the community is moving in. It's interesting, though, that in 40K, there's not really much bigotry in the way we understand it today. Is there, like, racism in the Imperium of Man? I'm sure there is on some planets, but it's not talked about much. Kind of hard to get super angry about black and white people when there are literal fucking aliens, you know? Also, likewise with homophobia. I don't think I've ever heard of gay characters in 40K. I don't know why there wouldn't be. I think some modern stuff sometimes, you know? Um, Against mutants, but not actual races. Yeah, I know, but I mean in terms of like our modern understanding of these problems. Uh, in the future, 40K media is probably going to be more racially diverse. They've been trying to make more female and non-white characters in their miniatures, which is really, really nice, I think. Which is definitely a step in the right direction. Their books are probably going to be a little bit more inclusive with the human element, which is nice. Dan Abnett, I think, does this really well. Dan Abnett wrote the first Horus Heresy book, and today he wrote the whole Eisenhorn trilogy. And the most modern trilogy that he's been writing, the Beckwin trilogy, has a female protagonist. A female protagonist who isn't even an Inquisitor. She's a regular, well, she's not regular by any means. She's a Null, but she's cool. Dan Abnett's done a lot of good writing. A Null? She's like an anti-psychic, basically. That's her thing. She's anti-psychic. Null, Null. The Beckwin series is wonderful. The Assassinatorum has a few ambiguously gendered characters. Yeah. Well, the more we expose this stuff to a broader audience, the more the Games Workshop company will work to be inclusive. And the more that happens, the more this community becomes available to everyone. And I think that's delightful. Is it possible for a Warhammer story to have a satisfying happy ending? Oh, I think that Warhammer stories that have happy endings are lovely. Warhammer as a universe cannot have a happy ending. Gotcha, Den209. I guess I should finish reading all of this. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that were the case, though. The Emperor is shown to be imperfect just from the very first book of the Horus Heresy. I didn't talk about it much either while going over all this, but the Imperium of Man is rampantly xenophobic as well. Very, very xenophobic. Like as xenophobic as anything can imagine. Like they would encounter like human settlements that have like evolved differently and be like, nah, not close enough, not close enough to us. Goodbye, farewell. Okay, I think we've talked about this long enough. Those are my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.